My finger hovered over the enter key, a strange calm replacing the rage that should have consumed me. Security stood behind me, waiting to escort me from the building I'd called home for 18 months. In my peripheral vision, Victor Carlton leaned against the doorframe, that predatory smirk on his face, the one I'd seen directed at competitors but never at me. Until today. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately," he said, voice dripping with false sympathy. "The $250,000 bonus is quite generous for what you've delivered." $250,000 for an AI security system worth billions. For 18 months of my life. For Precog, my creation, my vision, now supposedly belonging to Nextech Solutions. According to the contract, Victor was sliding across the desk. I nodded quietly and handed over my laptop. "Of course, Mr. Carlton. Good luck with the investor demo tomorrow." As I left the building, badge confiscated, and carrying the cliché cardboard box of personal items, I smiled, thinking about the special code hidden in the presentation Victor would run in less than 24 hours. Sometimes the greatest security threats come from where you least expect them. 3 days earlier, I had finally achieved what many claimed was impossible, an AI security system that could predict and neutralize cyber attacks before they fully formed. I named it Precog, after the precognitive beings in my favorite sci-fi movie. When the system successfully defended against a sophisticated attack simulation without human intervention, identifying vulnerabilities I hadn't even programmed it to recognize, I knew we had something revolutionary. I immediately scheduled a meeting with Victor, Nextech's CEO, to share the breakthrough. His assistant Megan squeezed me in for 15 minutes the following afternoon. Looking back, the signs were there: the rushed meeting, Victor's $1 million smile that never quite reached his eyes when he reviewed progress reports, the seemingly innocent questions about system architecture. When I arrived for my appointment, I found not just Victor, but also Diana Wells, the company's lead counsel, waiting for me. "Sit down, Sophia." Victor gestured to the chair across from him. "Diana's just here as a formality." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. I sat clutching my laptop with a demo ready to go. "Before we discuss your project," Victor began, sliding a document across the desk, "we need to address some concerns about your employment agreement." Diana spoke up, her voice professionally detached. Section 12.4 clearly states that all intellectual property developed using company resources belongs exclusively to Nextech Solutions. Of course, I nodded. "I'm aware of standard IP clauses, but Precog was initiated before I joined Nextech. I have documentation proving—" "We've reviewed your prior work," Diana interrupted. "While you had a basic concept, the actual functioning system was developed here on our time with our resources." Victor leaned forward, dropping the pretense. "Let's cut to the chase, Sophia. Precog belongs to Nextech. The board feels your compensation package is more than fair for what you've delivered." "My compensation package?" I repeated, confusion giving way to dawning horror. Victor smiled thinly. "Your employment contract has a success bonus clause. You'll receive a one-time payment of $250,000 when Precog goes to market. Generous considering industry standards?" The betrayal hit like a physical blow. $250,000 for a system that would be worth billions. A system that represented years of my research, 18 months of my life. "Tomorrow," Victor continued, oblivious to my shock, "I'm presenting Precog to our biggest investors. We expect to secure an additional $50 million in funding. After that, we'll announce our exclusive new cybersecurity product." "You're firing me," I said flatly. "Transitioning you out," Diana corrected. "Effective immediately, with your bonus, of course." I should have argued, threatened legal action, made a scene. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. They expected resistance, had prepared for it. What they didn't know was that I had prepared too. 6 months earlier, I discovered Victor had accessed my secure development server after hours. Nothing was taken, but the intrusion alerted me. From that moment, I began building safeguards into Precog, not just to protect it from external threats, but from internal ones too. That night, I didn't panic or plot revenge. I ordered takeout, watched mindless television, and waited. My phone rang at 9:30 p.m. "He wants to see you," Megan, Victor's assistant, said without preamble. "Now it's almost 10 p.m., I replied calmly. "He says it's urgent. A car is already on its way to your apartment." 40 minutes later, I was escorted into Nextech's main conference room. Victor sat alone at the head of the table, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, tie loosened, hair standing up where he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. "Fix it," he demanded as soon as the door closed behind me. I settled into a chair, deliberately taking my time. "Fix what exactly?" "Don't play games, Sophia." "You sabotaged the demo." I raised an eyebrow. "How could I?" "I've been gone for 24 hours. Security watched me clean out my desk. I didn't take any devices, access any systems." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "The test run crashed. The entire system started identifying bizarre threats that don't exist, generating thousands of false positives. It's completely unusable." "Sounds like a technical issue," I said. "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" His face flushed with anger. "This isn't funny. We have 12 major investors coming tomorrow. $50 million on the line." "Your investors," I reminded him. "Your system now, remember?" Victor took a deep breath, visibly forcing himself to calm down. When he spoke again, his voice had that smooth, persuasive quality that had convinced so many people, including me, to trust him. "Look, perhaps we were hasty yesterday. I'm prepared to discuss a more equitable arrangement. Co-creator credit, a larger compensation package, maybe even some equity." I leaned back in my chair. "What exactly happened during your test run?" Victor hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. The system seemed to turn on itself. It started identifying components of Nextech's own network as threats. Then it began generating reports, hundreds of them, documenting what it called internal ethical breaches. I couldn't help smiling. Precog is designed to identify threats, Victor. All threats. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I didn't sabotage anything. Precog is working exactly as designed. It's an AI system that learns and evolves to protect networks from malicious activity. During development, I fed it case studies of cyber attacks, including cases where threats came from inside organizations." Victor paled. "You taught it to spy on us?" "I taught it to recognize threats wherever they originate. It's detecting something it perceives as malicious within Nextech. I wonder what that could be." Understanding dawned on his face. "The system thinks I'm the threat. Not you specifically, but perhaps certain behaviors, unauthorized server access, attempts to modify creator credentials, plans to misrepresent ownership to investors." Victor's expression hardened. "You can't prove any of that." "I don't need to. Precog has been documenting everything for months. Every unauthorized access, every copied file, every modified document. It's all there in those reports it generated with timestamps, access logs, and recorded keystrokes." The silence that followed was profound. Victor stared at me, calculation replacing anger in his eyes. "What do you want?" "Full recognition as Precog's creator and primary architect. 50% ownership of all related patents and intellectual property. A board seat to oversee its ethical implementation, and $10 million in compensation for the attempt to push me out." "That's extortion," he hissed. "No, it's negotiation. Extortion would be me sending those reports directly to the investors and the SEC." Victor glared at me for a long moment before his shoulders slumped in defeat. "The system, can you fix it for tomorrow's demo?" "Precog doesn't need fixing. It needs proper authorization protocols. It's currently identifying unauthorized command attempts because its creator has been removed from the authentication chain. Simple fix, actually." I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and set it on the table between us. "This contains a proper authentication update that will resolve the immediate issues. Consider it a good faith gesture toward our new partnership. The contracts can be drawn up tomorrow. And if I refuse? Then precog remains broken, your investor demo fails, and those internal ethical breach reports find their way to some very interested parties. Your call. Victor reached for the flash drive. You planned this all along. No, I corrected him. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary. But after finding you in my secure server 6 months ago, I built in protections for the system. And for myself. How did you know I'd try to cut you out? I stood to leave. I didn't know for certain, but precog is designed to recognize patterns and predict threats before they materialize. I guess some of that rubbed off on its creator. The next morning, I arrived at Nextech as co-founder and chief technology officer. Victor introduced me to the investors with a strained smile that never reached his eyes. The demo went flawlessly, precog elegantly neutralizing every simulated attack thrown at it. One investor, impressed by the demonstration, asked Victor a question that made me hide a smile. Amazing system. What inspired its development? Victor hesitated just long enough before answering. It was actually Sophia's brainchild, her vision from the beginning. Nextech just provided the environment for that vision to flourish. As we fielded technical questions, my phone buzzed with a notification. Precog, now properly authenticated with my credentials restored, had sent me a private message. Threat neutralized. System integrity restored. Creator protections active. I smiled. The AI was learning faster than I'd anticipated. It had recognized an internal threat and helped eliminate it, just as designed. 3 months later, Precog's first commercial implementation prevented a major attack on a banking network, saving the institution an estimated $340 million, and establishing our system as the new gold standard in cybersecurity. Victor and I maintain a professional working relationship. He focuses on business development, where his skills are genuinely valuable, while I lead technical innovation. We're not friends and never will be, but we've reached an equilibrium that works. Sometimes I wonder if I could have handled things differently, taking legal action instead of building in safeguards. But the truth is, Victor's attempted betrayal revealed something important. Technology is only as ethical as the people who control it. That lesson has become central to how we deploy precog. Every implementation now includes robust ethical guardrails and transparency protocols. The system doesn't just protect networks, it protects itself and its users from misuse. Last week, as we celebrated precog's successful public offering, valuing the company at $4.2 billion, a young developer asked me the secret to building such revolutionary technology. It's not about the code, I told her. It's about understanding that the greatest security threats often come from where you least expect them. Build systems that can recognize those threats, adapt to them, and neutralize them without compromising their core integrity, just like their creator had learned to do. And if you're building something truly revolutionary right now, remember this. Protect your creation, but also protect yourself. Document everything. Build in safeguards. And recognize that sometimes the biggest threats aren't external hackers or competitors. They're the people sitting right next to you in the conference room, smiling while they plan to take what's yours. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about tech innovation, corporate intrigue, and how to stay one step ahead in an industry where brilliance alone isn't enough. Drop a comment if you've ever had your work stolen or ideas claimed by someone else. You're not alone, and your experience matters. Together, we can build technology that's not just powerful, but protected.
The temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees in the lavish restaurant as Morgan's words echoed across our table. Oh my, Natalie is from a single-parent family? How commendable that you've managed to accomplish anything at all. My fingers clenched around my water glass as Brian's mother continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy while her eyes remained cold. Being from a single-parent family, life must be quite hard, Dating someone like you would be so complicated for Brian. I glanced at Brian, my blind date and apparent heir to Sunrise Bank, who sat smugly beside his mother, nodding in agreement. The restaurant's ambient noise faded away as I watched them discuss my unfortunate background as if I weren't sitting right across from them, as if my mother weren't sitting right beside me, her back perfectly straight, her expression carefully controlled. Presumptuous for commoners to think they could marry into a family like ours. Brian's father, Richard, muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. Even if you try to bother us, it won't hurt you much since it's your money, Morgan added with a dismissive wave. Useless poor people with low backgrounds. As I did the final check, confirming that yes, these people had invited us here specifically to humiliate us, I asked, "You're saying we should close our account with your bank, right? Please go ahead." They smiled with disdain, eyes filled with contempt as they stared at us. I decided it was time to give those who judge others by their background a taste of their own medicine. With that thought, I smiled. My name is Natalie. I'm 29 and a marketing executive. This is the story of how I made a family of elitists lose everything they valued. I never expected to be ambushed like this. The blind date with Brian had been uncomfortable enough. His condescending attitude when he learned I worked for a major corporation rather than a prestigious financial institution, his constant self-aggrandizement, his dismissive glances. But when he suggested meeting our parents, I'd foolishly agreed, thinking it would be an easy way to end things with witnesses present. "Maybe you were just nervous because you haven't dated before," Mom had suggested when I'd told her about Brian's behavior. "The way he spoke was weird, Mom, like I was beneath him somehow." "Well, his parents will be there, right? Just say no if it doesn't feel right. I'll be there too." I'd apologized for dragging her into this, but she'd just laughed. "It's okay. Besides, I'm curious about Sunrise Bank." If only we'd known what they'd planned. When we arrived at the restaurant, our table was ready, but Brian's family was late. Deliberately, I realized later, to establish dominance. Richard offered no genuine apology for their tardiness, and Morgan immediately began her attack. "So where is your father? Is he coming later?" I looked at Brian, who just smirked dismissively. I'd already told him during our date that my father had passed away when I was young. They knew. This was calculated. Mom responded with remarkable composure. "My husband passed away from illness when Natalie was young, so today I'm here as her mother." That's when Morgan had raised her voice in that exaggerated manner, making sure nearby tables could hear. "Oh my, Natalie is from a single-parent family." Each comment cut deeper as they continued their performance. The worst part wasn't their cruelty, it was how rehearsed it felt, as if humiliating people they deemed socially inferior was a family pastime. "I'm not really into strong-willed women," Brian interjected when I defended myself, his tone suggesting I should be grateful he'd considered me at all. That's when Mom's patience finally broke. In 29 years, I'd rarely heard her speak so sternly. "Did you invite us here today just to look down on us? You're enjoying berating us for being a single-parent family, aren't you?" "Please stop with the accusations," Richard responded with mock offense. "It was just a little teasing, right?" "No one feels good being mocked, and all your remarks are condescending," Mom replied. "We have no intention of listening to this any further." Brian's family looked displeased at Mom's clear statement. "Presumptuous for commoners," Richard muttered. "Commoners, huh? Indeed, that may be the case, but this has made up my mind," Mom said. Brian's family looked briefly surprised, then burst into laughter, clearly thinking, "What could you possibly do?" Mom sighed and began to speak. "Actually, we have funds deposited with your bank, but we don't wish to entrust them to people like you." "Oh, really? But we don't know your name, so it can't be much, right? It's probably insignificant," Morgan dismissed. "That's right. Even if you try to trouble us with your funds, it won't really affect us. Low-class poor people are not needed," Richard added. I realized that even Mom's last attempt at reconciliation was in vain. They continued to speak disdainfully, unaware of who they were insulting. I sighed and made the final confirmation. "We're closing our account, right?" "Please go ahead," they said in a mocking tone, their eyes filled with disdain, making me feel disgusted as they stared at us. That night, I made a call I hadn't expected to make for years. "Grandpa Oliver, it's Natalie. I need your help." "What's wrong, sweetheart?" His voice was alert despite the late hour. "It's about Sunrise Bank." A pause. "What happened?" I explained everything. The blind date, the family meeting, the deliberate humiliation. "They didn't know who you were?" His voice had changed, taking on the sharp edge I remembered from my childhood visits to his office. "Number? And they made it very clear what they think about single-parent families and people they consider beneath them." Another pause. Longer this time. "Come to my house tomorrow morning, both you and your mother." The next morning, Mom and I arrived at Grandpa Oliver's estate, ready to discuss our plan. As we sat in his study, I realized I had forgotten to mention something important. "Grandpa, I recorded our entire conversation at the restaurant. I had a feeling things might go south, so I started my voice recorder app before we even ordered drinks." He nodded approvingly. "Smart girl. That will be useful." 2 weeks passed. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from Brian, which I ignored and eventually blocked. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. "Grandpa Oliver wants us at Sunrise Bank tomorrow at 9 a.m. I told Mom that evening. "Are you sure about this, Natalie?" "They chose this fight, Mom. They just chose it with the wrong people." As instructed by Grandpa Oliver, Mom and I arrived at Sunrise Bank the following day at 9 a.m. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly when I gave my name. "Of course, Miss Parker. Please follow me to the executive conference room." When we entered, Brian's family was already there, looking pale and uncomfortable. Morgan stood up immediately and rushed over to bow deeply. I didn't acknowledge her apology. Instead, I just smiled and asked, "What exactly are you apologizing for?" Morgan bit her lip, trembling with anger and frustration. There were too many things they should apologize for, which probably made her feel overwhelmed. "This situation started because I said we would close our account." I continued. "Our account wasn't particularly large, and closing it wouldn't have caused much damage." I paused, letting the tension build. But Grandpa Oliver's case was different. The door opened and Oliver Parker walked in, his presence filling the room instantly. At 78, he still carried himself with the authority of someone who expected and received immediate respect. Grandpa Oliver managed the inheritance my dad left at Sunrise Bank for our benefit. He also had his own accounts there. If all accounts, including Grandpa's and my dad's inheritance, were closed, it would total about $7 million. Richard paled visibly. I didn't know Natalie was related to the former CEO. "That's no excuse," I said sharply. "Even if you didn't know, your prejudice against our family is your own fault." "You mean, if we were relatives, you would have treated us differently?" Mom asked quietly. "Hey, don't talk to Dad like that," Brian snapped. "It's your fault for not telling us from the start that your grandpa was the former CEO. "I don't have any obligation to tell a stranger like you that," I replied coolly. "Besides, you were the one who started it and made fun of us, remember?" Brian, unable to retort, narrowed his eyes in frustration. "You insulted me knowing I was from a single-parent family. When I said I would close our account, you told us to go ahead. We just did as we were told." "But it may be just that for you, but have you ever thought about the feelings of someone whose family has been insulted?" Silence fell. Morgan was trembling, Richard was hanging his head, but Brian still seemed unconvinced, his face full of dissatisfaction. "Getting all high and mighty just because people talk about you," he muttered. Grandpa Oliver's voice cut through the room like ice. "Even after giving you a chance to reflect, you're still only thinking about yourselves." "It's not my fault, it's her." "Watch your words," Grandpa Oliver warned. "If you continue, you'll end up even more miserable." Brian, silenced by Oliver's words, glared at me again. Then, as if resigned, he burst out. "No way! Who would think a single parent's relative was the former CEO? You knew I was the future CEO and came to the family meeting just to mock us." "Brian, be quiet," Oliver commanded, his gaze turning to Richard. I understand wanting to leave the bank to your son, but now that I know his mindset, it's impossible for him to continue as CEO. That's ridiculous over something like this. Richard started to protest but sat down again under Oliver's glare. You still don't understand that your attitude is the problem. Oliver's voice was deadly calm. Though I'm retired, the board will decide if you have something to say. Say it to them. Remember, we recorded the previous conversation and this one. Don't forget that the voice recorder will serve as evidence. I took out a voice recorder and pressed play. The restaurant conversation filled the room, their contemptuous voices echoing off the walls. How dare you prepare something like that? It's unfair, Brian shouted. It was just a precaution, I replied. But remember, you forced me into this situation. Brian had nothing to say in return, and their faces turned ashen. Thank you, Oliver said to us. We'll handle it from here. Mom and I left, the weight of the past weeks finally lifting from my shoulders. In the end, Grandpa Oliver didn't transfer the funds, at least not officially. Richard was removed from his CEO position, and Brian was demoted. Seemingly unable to handle the blow to his pride, Brian resigned voluntarily. Grandpa Oliver's influence in the financial industry meant Brian would struggle to find work in the same field again. Richard seemed determined to work until retirement, but Grandpa said it would be tough for him, both mentally and physically. Morgan, who used to wield power as the CEO's wife, apparently started part-time work to maintain her lifestyle, but her character likely made it hard for her to keep a job. I apologized to my friend who had set up the blind date. I'm really sorry about all this. It's okay. You didn't know, right? I only shared what happened with the friend who introduced me to Brian. She just heard about him through someone else and wasn't at fault. Mom had initially been concerned about being a single parent, but I reassured her. I'm happy now and can live thanks to the support I've received. When I told her that, she smiled and said, "Thank you." After everything was taken care of, Grandpa Oliver told us to come over to his house again sometime. I'm really grateful for his help in resolving the situation. It was tough, but I'm happy now, so it's okay. I have some good news, too. I've been promoted at work, something I earned through my own merit, not family connections. I'm not interested in dating right now, but I'm satisfied with my current life. I want to keep cherishing those who support me, and maybe someday I'll meet someone I really connect with. Someone who values people for who they are, not where they come from. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles. Zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.
Clean out your desk by the close of business today. Human Resources will process your exit documents. The message on my monitor blurred as I read it again. After 5 years of loyal service to Peak Valley Shipping, all I received was an impersonal email. 3 days. That's all I had taken to lay my mother to rest. 3 days of approved bereavement leave. We need employees who make their work a priority, the email continued, as if attending my mother's funeral was some optional event I'd chosen instead of completing quarterly reports. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the quiet of the early morning. The Seattle office was still nearly empty, the sky just starting to brighten with daybreak. I had arrived early, eager to catch up on work after my short absence. My name is Morgan Reynolds, and until roughly 2 minutes ago, I was the district team leader of the highest performing division at Peak Valley Shipping. At 34, I had built not just a career, but a team that felt like family. We shared birthdays, supported each other through hard times, and encouraged each other to grow professionally. I glanced around my workspace, the small succulent my team had given me last Christmas, the framed photo of all of us at the company retreat, the handwritten notes from team members I'd mentored. 5 years of my life condensed into a few personal items that would fit in a cardboard box. The termination notice attached to the email was signed by Greg Turner, my immediate supervisor who had personally approved my bereavement leave just last week. Failure to maintain adequate presence during essential operational periods, it stated. My mother's death apparently coincided with one of these undefined essential periods. I didn't cry. I didn't pound my desk or march into Greg's office demanding an explanation. Instead, I took out my phone and photographed the email, then forwarded it to my personal account. Then I turned off my computer, stood up, and began methodically packing my belongings. By the time other employees started arriving, my desk was half cleared. Samantha from accounting was the first to notice. "Morgan, what's happening?" she asked, her eyes widening at the sight of my box. "I've been terminated," I replied simply. "What? Why?" Apparently taking approved bereavement leave to bury my mother wasn't demonstrating proper commitment to my work. Samantha's expression changed from confusion to outrage. "That's not right. Have you spoken to Richard? The district manager should hear about this." "No," I said carefully, wrapping my succulent in newspaper. "I'm not going to challenge it, but I won't forget it either." When you work closely with people for years, you learn to read their expressions. As I continued packing, more of my team members arrived. Eric was the first of my direct reports to hear the news, his usual friendly smile disappearing instantly. "This is ridiculous," he started, but I stopped him with a small shake of my head. "It's finished, Eric. Greg made his choice. But we just completed the Westview merger last month. Profits are up 18% this quarter because of your strategy." I smiled sadly. Apparently that wasn't sufficient. By 9:30, all 7 of my core team members had gathered around my desk in silent support. Nathan, our logistics specialist who rarely displayed emotion, looked ready to put his fist through a wall. Rebecca, our client relations manager, was openly weeping. Behind them stood Chris, Angela, Monica, Sophia, and Jack, each with expressions ranging from shock to fury. "You can't go," Rebecca insisted. "The Thompson account renewal is next week. The Rodriguez shipping contract is in negotiations. None of us understands the system like you do." I finished taping up my box. Greg should have considered that before he fired me for attending my mother's funeral. The weight of what I'd just said hung in the air. My mother, gone just a week ago, the funeral soil still fresh, and now this betrayal from a company I had given my heart to. "I need everyone back at their workstations," came a sharp voice from behind us. Greg Turner stood there, arms crossed, his narrow face set in a disapproving frown. "We have deadlines to meet." No one moved. "Right now," he added, his voice rising slightly. After a long moment, my team dispersed, each giving me a meaningful look as they returned to their desks. Greg approached me, lowering his voice. "This could have been handled more discreetly if you'd waited until the end of day to pack up." I met his gaze steadily. "Like the discretion you showed in firing me by email after approving my bereavement leave?" His jaw tightened. "Business requirements change quickly. Peak Valley needs employees who understand that priorities shift. Your mother's passing was unfortunate, but—" "Don't," I warned, my voice deadly calm. "Don't finish that sentence, Greg." For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across his face. Then he straightened, adjusting his tie. "Human Resources is expecting you. Please don't make this more complicated than necessary." I picked up my box. "Don't worry, I won't cause a scene. But remember this moment, Greg. You might find it significant later." The Human Resources office was sterile. White walls, minimal decoration, and Natalie Pham's sympathetic but practiced expression. She was new to the company, having joined just 6 months ago, and I could see she was uncomfortable with the situation. "I'm sorry about this, Morgan," she said, sliding separation papers across her desk. "And I'm very sorry about your mother." "Thank you," I replied, scanning the documents. Standard severance, 2 weeks' pay, a non-disparagement clause, a reminder of my non-compete agreement, which prohibited me from working for direct competitors for 6 months. "Is there anything I should know about why this happened?" Natalie asked cautiously. "This seems sudden." I considered how much to share, then decided on the truth. I took out my phone and showed her the email. 3 days of approved bereavement leave, and I'm fired for not prioritizing work. Natalie's professional demeanor slipped, her eyes widening. This is the actual termination notice? Just an email? No performance improvement plan? No documented warnings? Nothing? She frowned, making a note on her legal pad. I need to verify some things with the legal department. Would you excuse me for a moment? While Natalie stepped out, I gazed through the window. From this floor, I could see the Cascade River winding through the city. My mother had loved that river. She taught me patience there, standing in waders as the current flowed past our knees. The river moves, Morgan dear, she'd say, but the stones remain firm. Be like the stones. Natalie returned 20 minutes later, her expression carefully neutral, but her tight smile told me everything. Nothing would change. Unfortunately, Washington is an at-will employment state, she began. The company is within its rights to... I understand, I interrupted, signing the documents without further debate. Peak Valley can do whatever it wants, just like I can. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. Off the record, this isn't right. If you wanted to pursue action... I don't, I said firmly. But thank you. As I walked through the main office toward the exit, I felt eyes following me. My team watched silently, their faces somber. I gave them a small smile, my last act as their leader. Outside, the September air was surprisingly mild. I placed my box in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat, allowing myself a moment to process everything. My phone chimed with a text message, then another, and another. Eric, this is wrong. What can we do? Rebecca, are you okay? Can we meet later? Nathan, Greg's a gutless coward. The team is furious. More messages arrived, expressions of outrage, support, loyalty. These people weren't just colleagues. They were my professional family. I started my car, a plan already forming in my mind. I wouldn't confront Peak Valley directly. I wouldn't sue, though I probably had grounds. No, I would be strategic, patient, like my mother taught me. The stones stay firm while the river rushes past. My phone rang. It was Julia Blackwell, the CEO of Summit Global Logistics, Peak Valley's biggest competitor. We'd met at an industry conference last year and stayed in touch. She'd been trying to recruit me for months. It was time to return her call. The Summit Global Logistics office was everything Peak Valley wasn't. Open concept, collaborative workspaces, and large windows framing the Seattle skyline. Julia Blackwell, a tall woman with silver hair and perceptive eyes, welcomed me with a warm handshake. I've been hoping you'd call, she said, guiding me to a conference room. Though I admit I didn't expect it would be under these circumstances. News traveled fast in our industry. Julia already knew about my termination, though not the details. I filled her in as we sat down, showing her Greg's email. That's not just poor management, Julia said, frowning. That's inhumane. Bereavement leave exists for a reason. Peak Valley has always valued profits over people, I replied. I just never thought I'd be on the receiving end. Julia leaned forward. I'll be direct, Morgan. I want you on my team. Summit is expanding our Pacific Northwest operations, and we need someone with your expertise. The division director position is yours if you want it. My heart skipped. Division director, a significant promotion from my role at Peak Valley. More responsibility, more authority, better pay. What about my non-compete? I asked. Julia smiled. Our legal team has reviewed it. It's excessively broad and likely unenforceable. Plus, we'd cover any legal expenses if Peak Valley tried to enforce it. I'd need to consider it, I said carefully. Of course, Julia replied. Take the weekend. We can discuss specifics on Monday. That evening, I met Rebecca and Eric at Shoreline Brewing, a small pub away from downtown where we wouldn't likely encounter other Peak Valley employees. They arrived together, their expressions a mix of anger and concern. How are you holding up? Rebecca asked, sliding into the booth. I'm okay, I assured them. It's been a difficult couple of weeks, but I'll be fine. Eric snorted. Greg's an idiot. The office is already in chaos. Nobody knows where the Martinez proposal files are stored, and the system access you had hasn't been transferred to anyone else. That sounds like a Greg problem, I replied, taking a sip of my water. Rebecca leaned forward. It's more than that. Everyone's talking, not just our team. People are furious about how you were treated. I hadn't expected that. Really? You were respected, Morgan, Eric said. Not just by us. The way Greg handled this, people are worried now. If they do this to you, their star team lead, what would they do to anyone else? Rebecca nodded. Richard has been asking questions. The district manager looks concerned. Good, I said simply. As we talked, more texts arrived from other team members, similar stories of disorganization, frustration, and anger at management. Peak Valley was feeling my absence already. What will you do now? Eric asked. I hesitated. I've had an offer from Summit. Their eyes widened. But your non-compete? Those aren't always enforceable, Rebecca said quickly. She worked with contracts daily and knew the legalities. Especially if they fired you without cause? That's what Summit's legal team said, but it's still a risk. Eric's phone buzzed. He checked it and frowned. Greg's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, Saturday. He's never done that before. The Thompson account review is due Monday, Rebecca explained to me. Nobody can find your analysis files. I smiled slightly. Those files were properly stored on the company server, but my particular organizational system wasn't immediately obvious to others. I hadn't anticipated this would become an issue, but I couldn't deny feeling a flicker of satisfaction. I should get going, I said, gathering my purse. Early appointment tomorrow. As I stood to leave, Eric caught my eye. Morgan, if you did go to Summit, hypothetically speaking, would they be hiring? I paused, studying their faces. Hypothetically? Yes, they're expanding rapidly. The look that passed between Eric and Rebecca told me everything. Saturday morning, I met with Marcus Diaz, an employment lawyer recommended by a friend. His office was small but elegant, with diplomas from prestigious universities adorning the walls. I explained my situation, showing him the email and termination notice. This is textbook wrongful termination, Marcus said, removing his glasses. Firing someone for taking approved bereavement leave could be argued as both a breach of contract and a violation of good faith. I'm not interested in suing, I clarified. I just want to understand my options regarding my non-compete agreement. Marcus reviewed the document carefully. This is overly restrictive. 6 months prohibition on working for competitors within a 300-mile radius? That's essentially telling you to leave the industry or relocate. Is it enforceable? I asked. In Washington, it's questionable, especially given the circumstances of your termination. Courts typically won't enforce non-competes when the employer acts in bad faith. He leaned back in his chair. What's your plan, Morgan? Summit Global Logistics has offered me a position. Better title, better pay. Marcus nodded. Peak Valley would have to prove that you're causing them actual harm by working there. Given that they terminated you, that's a difficult argument to make. He scribbled some notes. I'd say proceed with caution, but don't let this non-compete prevent you from earning a living. Over the weekend, my phone continued buzzing with messages from my former team. The emergency Saturday meeting had apparently been tense. Greg was pressuring everyone to take on additional responsibilities to cover my absence with no extra compensation. The Thompson account files had been located, but nobody fully understood my analysis methodology. By Sunday evening, I had made my decision. Monday morning, I called Julia Blackwell. I accept your offer, I told her, but I have one condition. Name it, Julia replied. I want to build my own team. If my former colleagues from Peak Valley apply to Summit, I want them to receive fair consideration. Absolutely, Julia agreed. If they're half as talented as you, we'd be lucky to have them. That afternoon, I signed my contract with Summit, Division Director of Pacific Northwest Operations. The salary was 40% higher than what I'd been making at Peak Valley, with better benefits and a sign-on bonus. As I left Summit's offices, I checked my phone to find 7 new messages, one from each core member of my former team. They all wanted to meet for coffee, privately. Tuesday morning, I sat at a quiet corner table in a small coffee shop downtown, waiting. Eric arrived first, then Rebecca. One by one, Nathan, Angela, Monica, Sophia, and Jack joined us until we filled 2 tables pulled together. Peak Valley is imploding, Nathan said without preamble. Greg's micromanaging everyone. Richard is breathing down his neck and clients are asking questions. The Thompson account is threatening to pull out, Rebecca added. They wanted to know why you weren't handling their renewal. I sipped my coffee, listening as each shared similar stories of chaos and frustration. We heard you've accepted a position at Summit, Eric finally said. The others grew quiet, watching me intently. News travels fast, I observed. We want to come with you, Rebecca stated firmly. The others nodded in agreement. I studied their faces. You all have good positions at Peak Valley. Secure jobs. Are you sure you want to risk that? What security? Angela asked bitterly. If they'd fire you for attending your mother's funeral, none of us are safe. Summit is hiring, I said carefully. I can't promise anything, but I can refer you. Each of you would need to apply formally. We already have, Sophia revealed, pulling out printed copies of confirmation emails. All 7 of us. Yesterday. I couldn't hide my surprise. You applied before talking to me? We trust you, Morgan, Jack said simply. Where you go, we go. I felt a surge of emotion, gratitude mixed with vindication. Let me make some calls. The following Monday, my phone rang at 7:30 a.m. The caller ID displayed Richard Bennett, Peak Valley's district manager. Morgan, Richard's voice had a forced calmness. We need to talk. Good morning, Richard, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. What can I do for you? I've just received 7 resignation letters, all from your former team, all effective immediately. There was a pause. Care to explain? I took a slow breath. I'm not sure what explanation you're looking for. I don't work for Peak Valley anymore. They're all going to Summit, where you just started as division director. His voice hardened. This doesn't look coincidental. People make career choices for various reasons, Richard. Perhaps you should ask Greg why your top-performing team is leaving en masse. This is about your termination, isn't it? He sounded resigned now. I've reviewed the situation. Greg didn't consult me before letting you go. I would never have approved it. That's between you and Greg, I replied. Though I'm curious why Peak Valley's district manager wasn't involved in terminating a team lead. Richard sighed. Greg claimed it was an urgent performance issue that couldn't wait for my return from the Portland conference. I trusted his judgment. Clearly that was a mistake. I said nothing, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. Look, Morgan, Richard finally continued. I'm prepared to offer you your position back with a 10% raise and a formal apology. We need your expertise. The Thompson account is threatening to walk. I appreciate the offer, Richard, but I've accepted a position elsewhere. We'll match whatever they're paying, plus 15%. It's not about the money. Then what would it take? There was desperation in his voice now. 7 key employees walking out simultaneously is devastating. The operational knowledge alone. It would take time travel, I interrupted. Going back to when my mother died, and Peak Valley showing basic human decency instead of punishing me for grieving. The line went quiet. I need to go, Richard. I start my new position today, and I don't want to be late. Your non-compete, he began. Feel free to have your legal team contact mine, I replied evenly. Though they might want to review the circumstances of my termination first. After hanging up, I drove to Summit's offices, arriving early to prepare for the day. Julia met me in the lobby, beaming. We're considering all 7 of your former colleagues, she said. Their qualifications are impressive. Interviews start Wednesday. Thank you for giving them a fair chance, I replied. Fair chance? Morgan, their top talent. Peak Valley's mistake is our gain. 2 days later, I received another call, this time from Natalie Pham in Human Resources at Peak Valley. I shouldn't be telling you this, she said quietly, but Greg Turner has been placed on administrative leave pending review. Richard is launching an investigation into management practices, particularly around bereavement and time-off policies. That's good to hear, I said genuinely. The board of directors is involved now, Natalie continued. Losing an entire specialized team to a competitor has triggered alarm bells. They're reviewing all terminations from the past year. By Friday, all 7 of my former team members had received and accepted offers from Summit. We met for dinner to celebrate, raising glasses in a toast. To new beginnings, Rebecca said. And to Morgan, Eric added, who taught us what real leadership looks like. The following week, I received a formal letter from Peak Valley acknowledging my wrongful termination and offering a settlement to avoid litigation. I accepted it, not for the money, but for the official admission that they had been wrong. That same day, the Thompson account signed with Summit, bringing their business to us after learning that their preferred team now worked under my direction. The river had moved, but we had remained firm, like stones, just as my mother had taught me. 3 months later, I stood at the front of Summit's largest conference room, presenting our quarterly results to the executive team. The numbers spoke for themselves: 30% growth in our division, 4 major client acquisitions, 3 of them former Peak Valley accounts, and operational efficiency improvements that had reduced costs by 22%. Exceptional work, Morgan, Julia said when I finished. You and your team have exceeded every projection. I smiled. My team deserves the credit. They've been remarkable. After the meeting, I returned to my office to find my 7 core team members waiting with a cake. What's this for? I asked. It's been exactly 3 months since we all jumped ship together, Eric explained. We're celebrating our Independence Day. I laughed. You're all ridiculous. But happy, Rebecca added. Seriously, Morgan, everyone's thriving here. It was true. Each team member had grown professionally in their new roles at Summit. They had more autonomy, better resources, and were finally receiving recognition for their contributions. Most importantly, they were valued as people, not just productivity machines. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Peak Valley Shipping announces restructuring amid client exodus. I showed it to the group. I heard they lost the Rodriguez contract last week, Nathan said, cutting cake slices. That's 20% of their Pacific Northwest revenue. Greg's gone, Angela added. Cleared out his office Friday. Richard is trying to save what's left. But I felt no pleasure in Peak Valley's struggles, only a sense of justice. The company wasn't failing because we had left. It was failing because its leadership had created a culture where employees were disposable, where attending a mother's funeral was considered a lack of commitment. I raised my water glass. May they learn that a company is only as strong as how they treat their people. And to Morgan, Sophia added, who showed us we deserved better. 6 months after joining Summit, I received an unexpected lunch invitation from Richard Bennett. He'd left Peak Valley and joined a management consulting firm specializing in organizational culture. We met at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Cascade River. Richard looked different, more relaxed, the perpetual stress lines around his eyes softened. Thank you for meeting me, he began. I wanted to apologize properly for what happened. You weren't directly responsible, I reminded him. No, but I created the environment that made it possible. He sighed. After you and your team left, everything unraveled. The board brought in external consultants to evaluate what went wrong. The report wasn't flattering to any of us in leadership. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Peak Valley is being acquired by Northern Transit, Richard revealed. At a fraction of its previous valuation. They're basically buying the client list and physical assets. The news didn't surprise me. Peak Valley had been hemorrhaging clients and talent for months. What about Greg? I asked. Still unemployed, last I heard. His reputation in the industry. He trailed off. Let's just say your story has circulated widely. I hadn't spread the details of my termination, but I hadn't hidden them either. When asked why I'd left Peak Valley, I told the simple truth. I've learned a valuable lesson from all this, Richard continued. Now I'm helping other companies avoid the same mistakes. As we finished lunch, Richard asked the question I sensed had been on his mind all along. Was it worth it? Walking away quietly instead of fighting? I thought about my team at Summit, thriving, motivated, and treated with respect. I thought about the clients who had followed us, who now received better service. I thought about my mother, who had taught me that sometimes the strongest response isn't the loudest. Yes, I replied simply. The results speak for themselves. 1 year after that fateful email that had changed the course of my career, Summit named me Executive Vice President of Operations for the entire Northwest region. My division had become the company's crown jewel, efficient, innovative, and boasting the highest employee satisfaction scores in the organization. Each of my 7 team members had been promoted as well. Eric now led his own division. Rebecca had transformed our client relations approach and earned recognition throughout the industry. The others had similarly distinguished themselves, their talents finally receiving the appreciation they deserved. On the anniversary of my termination from Peak Valley, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was my old succulent plant, now slightly larger but still thriving, with a note from Natalie Pham. Rescued this from your desk. Thought you might want it back now. Peak Valley closes for good next week. I placed the succulent on my windowsill where it would get plenty of sunlight. Like me, it had survived being discarded and found a better place to grow. That evening, I drove to the Cascade River and stood on the bank where my mother and I used to fish. The water flowed steadily around the stones, just as it always had. I thought about how a single moment, a cold email terminating my employment, had ultimately led to greater success and happiness. Not just for me, but for everyone who had followed me. You were right, Mom, I whispered to the river. Sometimes you need to stay firm and let the current do its work. As I looked back on my journey from terminated team lead to executive vice president, I realized my revenge hadn't been in destroying Peak Valley. My revenge had been in building something better. A workplace where bereavement leave wasn't viewed as a lack of commitment, where people were valued beyond their productivity metrics, where leadership meant empowering others rather than controlling them. The greatest revenge wasn't in tearing down what had hurt me, but in creating something that made the old system obsolete. My mother would have been proud of that. Looking toward the future, I felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had brought me here, even the painful parts. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. If you remain as steady as the stones while the river of change rushes past.